According to official FBI data and research by independent organizations like the Murder Accountability Project, in the 1960s and 1970s, the clearance rate for murder cases was around 90%. But in recent years, especially since the year 2000, this number has dropped quite alarmingly, to the point that now only about 50 to 60% of murders in America are actually solved, and nearly 40 to 50% of murder cases regrettably remain open forever, or as they say, become cold cases. Today, we want to talk about an old case that had been gathering dust for years, but after decades, with the cooperation of a determined police officer and a profiler, it took a path that everyone thought was impossible. If you want to know how going beyond conventional methods can help solve a case, and whether the killer in this cold case was finally discovered and brought to justice, and what was the secret behind this strange and twist-filled collaboration between the police and the profiler, full of scientific and supernatural elements. Be sure to stay with me until the end of this video, because today we're going to dive into a true story that will both amaze you and teach you some important lessons. December 1984, in a small town called Comroe in the state of Pennsylvania. 2 days before Christmas, while the townspeople were getting ready for the new year, the body of a woman was found on the outskirts of town. The unidentified woman had been tied up very precisely with rope, her body wrapped in a green army blanket, and then covered with a painted, colorful cloth over her shoulders. The autopsy revealed that the woman was about 30 years old and had a history of drug use. Since the woman's identity was unknown, as is customary in America, she was given the nickname Jane 2, a term used for an unidentified woman whose identity is unknown. At that time, forensic science was not very advanced yet, and no clues about the killer were found. Therefore, the unidentified woman's case remained unsolved for more than 20 years, until a police officer named Detective Robert Warner met with Dr. Lorraine Thibodeau, who is a psychic, that is, someone who claims to receive information from the supernatural world using senses beyond the usual 5. Warner says, "I told myself I should use any tool I have. It's better than having nothing at all. So, since I had nothing to lose, I went to talk to Dr. Lorraine." However, Warner didn't tell anyone about this meeting because he didn't know how others would react to it. He didn't even tell Lorraine why he had come, or even that he was a cop. But Lorraine herself told Warner, "You're a cop, right?" And Warner confirmed it. But things got even stranger when Lorraine said, "I see little green lights on Route 72 to 8. It's like I'm following New York, New Jersey, and Eastern Pennsylvania on a map." Then Lorraine looked up and said, "Brooklyn Bridge. I'm seeing the Brooklyn Bridge." And that's when Warner realized they were dealing with New York. Lorraine didn't just see the location and the route. She also made a guess about the killer's job and asked Detective Warner, "Could the person you're suspicious of be a truck driver? Because all I keep seeing is a truck." Well, one of the suspects in 1984 really was a truck driver. There was a guy who would pick up red-haired women, strangle them, and throw them out of his truck. But the thing was, that man wasn't in Pennsylvania at the time, and even the way the ropes were tied was different. So, since there was no evidence, it couldn't be said that he was the killer in this case. But maybe Lorraine wasn't wrong, and she actually meant another truck driver. But the main question was, where is the real killer now? And when the case was handed over to Warner after all these years, he didn't even know the victim's name. All he knew was that, according to the autopsy, the woman had a history of drug use. And the important point was that forensic technology had advanced a lot over the years. One of Warner's colleagues thought that maybe because of her history of drug use, this woman might have an arrest record. In the US, the fingerprints of people who are arrested are entered into the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, known as the IAFIS, which is now more commonly referred to as NGI. Of course, this system didn't exist in 1984, the year Jane Doe 2 was murdered. But now, decades later, Warner could use this system. That's because when the systems were later updated, records of previous arrests were also entered. At that point, previous fingerprints were also entered into the system, making it possible to match the victim's fingerprints with those in the database. So, when Warner entered the unknown woman's fingerprints into the system, two names came up: Margaret Calciano and Margaret Gravasi, the latter being the woman's married name. Because in the 70s, Margaret had been married for about a year. Warner could search specific names along with the state in his system, but when he looked up Margaret Gravasi in Brooklyn, New York, he didn't find anything noteworthy. But when he added Margaret's middle name, he got 250 results related to Margaret Cassiano Gravasi in Brooklyn, and the first number he called belonged to Margaret's mother, June Cassiano. June Cassiano. When Warner called her and asked, "Do you have a daughter named Margaret?" she confirmed, and Warner introduced himself and said, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but we found your daughter." June asked, "What do you mean by found?" Warner said, "She was murdered. Margaret's mother lived for many years in a fear and anguish that only a mother can understand. An absolute terror from not knowing whether her daughter was alive or dead. But now, at last, her waiting was over." June, in that moment, felt both sadness and a sense of relief. Deep down, she always felt that Margaret wasn't alive, but doubt never let her rest, and she was always afraid that maybe her daughter had been cut into pieces and that her body would never be found, never able to be buried with dignity. The last time June saw her daughter, they had an argument, and the mother slapped Margaret. Margaret then left the house, and that was the last time they saw each other. After Warner was able to identify the victim's name, Margaret's family told Warner who they suspected. Peter Iosa was the last person who saw Margaret. Her family said that Peter was deeply in love with Margaret, and if Margaret was with someone else, Peter would get extremely upset. He was about 20 years older than Margaret. He was also a bit hot-tempered and used to beat Margaret. Peter was the one who paid for Margaret's drugs as well. Margaret's family was sure that Peter was the killer, because on December 19th, the day Margaret disappeared, Peter had also vanished. But the problem was, even though they knew Peter was the main suspect, they didn't know how to find him. Warner started investigating again, but he couldn't find the name Peter Iosa anywhere in New York or even in the entire United States. According to census data, there were a lot of people named Peter living in America at that time, and the detectives had to find the right Peter. It seemed like a tough job, and that's why Warner contacted the psychic, Lauren. While Lauren was talking to Warner on the phone, images started coming to her mind. A truck driver who wasn't burly at all, but actually quite skinny. He definitely smoked. He had a white truck and was wearing a thick plaid flannel shirt, the kind people wear instead of a coat in winter. The air was cool and sharp. There was a smell of water. It was as if the place was near water, somewhere near the Great Lakes in the US and Canada. Lauren felt that the man was a dangerous serial killer, and she could sense a great deal of violence emanating from him. This included sexual violence, physical assault, and other similar disturbing things. When the possibility was raised that this murder might not have been a one-off crime of passion, but perhaps the work of a serial killer, Detective Warner became even more motivated to pursue the case. He had to find him no matter what. Who knew how many other murders this killer had committed over the years while roaming free on the streets? Warner felt that as long as this killer was out there, no woman was safe. To get to Peter's relatives, Warner called Joe Drzak, Marguerite's ex-boyfriend. Joe said he didn't know Peter's last name exactly, but he did know that Peter had once filed a complaint, and maybe they could find Peter's last name through that complaint. So Warner contacted the New York Police Department. He presented the information he had, and a few days later, a report came in that revealed the suspect's real name, Peter Williams. Then Warner used Peter Williams' social security number to track him down. A social security number is a 9-digit identification number that the US government assigns to citizens and legal residents. It has many uses as well. So, using this number, Warner was able to find out that he was receiving government assistance in the city of Milwaukee. And of course, he discovered that Peter, just as Lauren had predicted, really was a truck driver. More importantly, one of his main routes was from Brooklyn to Wisconsin, to the point that he would pass right by the Great Lakes. Once again, Lauren's predictions turned out to be strangely accurate. Up to this point, with Lauren's help, Warner had managed to come up with a name, Peter Williams. But could Warner possibly find definitive evidence to truly convict Peter as Marguerite's killer? When Warner met Peter for the first time, he introduced himself and explained why he was there. Peter turned pale and got nervous. He said that the last time he saw Marguerite, he took her to a methadone clinic, and after that, he had nothing more to do with her and basically cut her off. Since Warner had taken over the case, he had sent all the evidence to the lab to be re-examined. New technology in forensic science had managed to find a different strand of hair in the army blanket that Marguerite's body was wrapped in. In order to prove that the hair belonged to Peter Williams, Warner needed to get a DNA sample from him. Peter had admitted that he had a sexual relationship with Marguerite, but insisted he didn't kill her. Peter didn't know that the police had that strand of hair. That's why he allowed them to take a DNA sample from him. But the DNA test result was positive and matched perfectly with the hair found in the blanket. When Peter was arrested, he glanced at the hair evidence and didn't say much. He didn't claim innocence. It was as if he accepted it. Peter Williams was charged with first-degree murder. However, a month before the trial, he died of cancer and once again, in a way, escaped the grasp of justice. After all this, Marguerite's mother, June Calciano, felt like she'd been deceived twice. Once, when Peter killed Marguerite and her mother didn't even know for years where her daughter was or what had happened to her. And once again when, without ever facing Marguerite's mother in court and being convicted, he escaped the law. Marguerite Calciano's body, after being officially identified, was respectfully exhumed from the local cemetery where she had been initially buried at her mother's heartfelt request, and subsequently reburied in the historic Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, just a few short blocks from her mother's cherished home. But even Warner felt a profound sense of regret after all of this transpired. Since Peter died before the trial, he remained only a suspect or the main person of interest in the case and was never definitively convicted. Also, because there was no trial, according to American law, any suspect is innocent until proven guilty, and that's why his DNA can't be entered into the national database. Therefore, the police who are reviewing cold cases can never consider Williams as a suspect ever again, and will never truly know for sure how many murders Peter actually committed, and his possible victims will remain unidentified. When I look at this story myself, I'm still amazed at how a case that had been gathering dust for years could make so much progress with the help of a profiler. Maybe some people still don't believe in these things, or even mock and laugh at them. But I think when reason and intuition come together, miracles can happen. What do you think? Be sure to write your thoughts in the comments. In short, throughout every era, there have always been many women who disappeared in America, and Marguerite Calciano was just one of them. Someone who even remained unidentified for decades. However, thanks to the collaboration between Detective Robert Warner and the psychic Lauren Thibodeau, Marguerite had the chance to finally be identified. This collaboration also led to the main suspect, a man named Peter Williams. Although justice was not fully served in this case, the lesson we can take from this story is that sometimes psychic abilities can serve as a helpful tool in solving a case. Here too, Warner was able to piece together the puzzle using the clues Lauren had given him and ultimately solve the case. So let's remember that sometimes, to uncover the truth, we need to open our eyes and minds to new methods, no matter how strange they may seem. Because behind every cold case, there is a family waiting for truth and peace.